Close your eyes for a moment and picture this. You're standing at the edge of an unknown ocean. No smartphone in your pocket. No satellite beeping coordinates from the sky. Not even a reliable clock to tell you how long you've been traveling. Yet somehow you're expected to map the world, to measure continents, trace coastlines, and place cities and mountains exactly where they belong. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? A task so monumental that today, with all our technology, it still feels almost magical. But this was the reality for the ancient mapmakers, the visionary thinkers, and meticulous observers who, against all odds, gave us the first true pictures of our planet. These women and men, working millennia before the invention of the telescope or the calculator, created maps of such startling accuracy that they continue to mystify and inspire scientists and historians to this day. How did they do it? Without satellites, without GPS, often without even a common language or shared reference point, how did they measure the curve of the Earth, plot the rhythms of the stars, and sketch the boundaries of lands they had only heard about in travelers' tales? The answer lies in a breathtaking blend of intuition, patience, raw intellect, and a deep connection to the natural world, a kind of genius that feels almost lost in our high-speed digital age. In this video, we're setting out on a journey to uncover their secrets. We'll explore the tools they crafted from stone and bronze, the mathematical breakthroughs they made with little more than shadows and simple geometry, and the cultural visions that turned maps into something far greater than navigation aids, into art, ideology, and declarations of human understanding. This is more than a history lesson. It's an invitation to rediscover a time when curiosity was the ultimate technology, and the will to know, to truly see the world, drove some of the most stunning achievements in human history. So settle in. Where we're going, you won't need a map, but you'll come away with a whole new appreciation for those who made the first ones. Long before anyone ever thought to divide the world with lines of latitude and longitude, our ancestors were already drawing maps, not on paper, but on the very walls of their caves and into the soft clay of riverbanks. These first attempts to chart the world were about so much more than just finding your way from one place to another. They were a profound expression of how a culture saw its place in the cosmos, a blend of the physical and the spiritual that tells us what these people truly valued. The oldest surviving maps we have, like the ones pressed into Babylonian cuneiform tablets, are not simple guides. They are intricate declarations of power, faith, and a deep-seated need to bring order to a vast and often intimidating world. Take the famous Babylonian world map from around 600 BCE. If you were to look at it hoping to plan a journey, you'd be utterly lost. It shows the Earth not as a sphere, but as a flat disk, floating in a bitter river, with the great city of Babylon sitting proudly at its absolute center. Radiating out from this heart are strange, labeled regions, not just cities or mountains, but places of myth and legend, the homes of gods and monsters. A river wasn't just a body of water, it was a divine entity. A mountain wasn't just a geological feature, it was the sacred abode of a deity. This map wasn't designed for a traveler, it was made for a philosopher, a priest, or a king. It was a statement. This is our world, this is our understanding of it, and we are at the very center of everything. This beautiful, symbolic approach was the rule, not the exception, in these early days. For these ancient societies, separating geography from religion or mythology would have been a completely foreign concept. The world was an alive, enchanted place, and their maps reflected that holistic view. They were as much about charting the territories of the gods as they were about charting the lands of humans. A map could be used for practical purposes, like defining property lines for taxation after a flood, but it could just as easily be a ritual object, a means of connecting the earthly realm with the celestial one. Understanding this deep, intrinsic link between early mapmaking and culture is absolutely crucial. It shows us that the evolution of cartography wasn't just a straight line from less accurate to more accurate. It was a journey from one way of seeing the world to another, from a worldview dominated by story and belief to one increasingly shaped by observation, measurement, and a desire for empirical truth. These early symbolic maps are not primitive mistakes. They are the foundational layer, the first brave attempt to answer the most human of questions. Where are we, and what does it all mean? They set the stage for everything that was to come, providing the raw material that later, more scientifically minded thinkers would strive to measure and define. But to truly grasp how they turn the night sky into a tool, we have to step into their world. Picture an Egyptian priest on a clear, desert night. The air is still, the darkness absolute, save for the brilliant tapestry overhead. He isn't just stargazing, he's reading a divine blueprint. The Egyptians noticed something profound. While most stars seemed to wander, a few remained constant. They identified these imperishable ones, the circumpolar stars that never dipped below the horizon, as the anchors of the universe. This wasn't merely an observation. It was the foundation of their belief in an eternal afterlife, a concept they literally set in stone by aligning the narrow shafts of the Great Pyramid directly toward these specific, undying stars, creating a celestial pathway for their pharaohs. This deep connection between the heavens and the earth was a universal language among ancient cultures. Far from the deserts of Egypt, Polynesian voyagers were undertaking feats of navigation that defy belief. With no sight of land for weeks, they would launch their massive double-hulled canoes into the vast emptiness of the Pacific Ocean. Their map was not drawn on parchment but memorized, an oral tradition passed down through generations of navigators. They knew the star paths, which specific star would rise or set over a particular island. To reach Tahiti, for instance, you would steer your canoe so that the star Arcturus remained directly overhead. But their genius didn't stop there. They read the ocean itself like a map, the direction of swells, the flight patterns of birds returning to land at dusk, the subtle changes in watercolor, and the presence of specific floating debris. They synthesized this celestial and marine data into a mental chart of incredible accuracy, a living, breathing form of cartography that allowed them to colonize the most remote islands on Earth long before European explorers dared to leave the coastline. Back in the Mediterranean, Greek philosophers were taking these celestial observations and forging them into the language of science. They began to quantify what others had qualitatively observed. They understood that the angle of the North Star above the horizon, what we now call latitude, changed predictably as you traveled north or south. A traveler moving away from the equator would see Polaris climb higher in the sky, and by measuring that angle with simple instruments like the gnomon, a vertical stick, they could estimate their distance from home. This was a monumental leap. It meant that the sky could provide not just direction but a numerical coordinate. The heavens were no longer just a spiritual guide. They were a grid waiting to be decoded. This marriage of astronomy and geography gave birth to the very idea of a coordinate system. The Babylonians, master astronomers in their own right, had already divided the circle into 360 degrees based on their precise yearly calendar. The Greeks adopted and formalized this, laying the groundwork for the lines of latitude and longitude that would later crisscross the globe. Suddenly, the location of a place wasn't just described as a 5-day journey up the coast. It could be theoretically pinned to a specific point on a spherical Earth using the sun and stars as reference. This shift from relative description to absolute measurement was the pivotal moment. It was the spark that would eventually lead to Eratosthenes calculating the entire planet's circumference from the shadow of a single stick, a story of breathtaking brilliance that will come to very soon. Now let's hold that Babylonian worldview in our minds and turn our attention to one of the most extraordinary artifacts to survive from that time, a small, fragile clay tablet that offers us a direct window into how they saw the universe. This is the Imago Mundi, the Babylonian world map, and it is utterly unlike any map we would recognize today. Created around 600 BCE, it wasn't designed to guide a merchant to a nearby city or a soldier to a mountain pass. If you tried to use it for navigation, you would be hopelessly lost. Instead, this map served a far deeper, more profound purpose. It was a philosophical statement, a theological diagram, and a piece of political propaganda, all pressed into the surface of a single tablet. At first glance, the design seems simple. The world is depicted as a flat, circular disk floating in a vast, encircling ocean that the Babylonians called the Bitter River. But right at the heart of this disk, drawn disproportionately large and impossible to miss, is the city of Babylon itself. A rectangle is labeled clearly, asserting its central, dominant position in the cosmos. Radiating out from this epicenter are other, smaller rectangles representing neighboring cities like Susa and Assyria, along with squiggles depicting rivers and small circles for more distant territories. But the map doesn't stop at the edges of the known world. Beyond the Bitter River, at the very corners of the tablet, lie 8 triangular regions. These are the Nagu, the far-off, mysterious lands that existed at the very limits of knowledge and imagination. And here, the map shifts from geography to mythology. These outer regions are described in the cuneiform text not as places one could visit, but as realms of legend, places inhabited by monstrous beasts, heroic figures, and the gods themselves. This is the crucial thing to understand. The Babylonian world map was never intended to be a literal, accurate representation of physical geography. It was a symbolic one. It answered the question, where are we, not with measurements but with meaning. By placing Babylon at the absolute center, the mapmakers were making a powerful ideological claim. Our city is the axis mundi, the center of the civilized world and the universe itself. Everything else radiates out from us in importance. The distant, mythical lands serve to reinforce this idea. They defined the known world, the world centered on Babylon, by contrasting it with the terrifying and wonderful unknown that lay just beyond. It was a way of organizing chaos into order, of asserting that their culture, their gods, and their king were the stabilizing force in a cosmos that could otherwise be strange and frightening. This beautiful, intricate blend of the real and the mythical shows us that for the Babylonians and for many ancient cultures, separating science from story would have been a meaningless exercise. Their understanding of the world was holistic. A river was both a source of water for irrigation and a divine entity. A mountain was both a physical landmark and the abode of a god. Their map reflects this enchanted worldview perfectly. It is a snapshot of a mind that saw no contradiction between charting the Euphrates River and describing the homeland of a mythical hero. It stands as a powerful reminder that every map, even our modern digital ones, tells a story. They are never purely objective. They always reflect the biases, priorities, and worldview of the culture that creates them. The Babylonians prioritized cosmic order and cultural dominance over navigational precision, and in doing so, they left us a priceless record of how they saw their place in the grand scheme of everything. While the Babylonians were crafting maps to define their cosmic and cultural universe, a revolutionary shift was brewing on the rocky coast of Ionia, in a bustling port city called Miletus. Here, a philosopher named Anaximander looked at the world and asked a different kind of question altogether. He wasn't satisfied with stories of bitter rivers and mythical beasts at the edge of the world. He wanted to know what the world actually was, based on reason, observation, and logical deduction. His answer, conceived around 610 BCE, was nothing short of breathtaking. He dared to create one of the first maps intended not for spiritual edification, but for scientific understanding, a move that fundamentally severed geography from mythology and set it on a path we still follow today. Imagine the sheer audacity of this project. Anaximander's world was a small place, a narrow ribbon of known land surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. Beyond that lay only rumor, legend, and the terrifying unknown. Yet, he took this fragmented information and synthesized it into a coherent, unified vision. He proposed that the Earth was not a flat disk resting on water or held up by a giant, as many then believed, but a free-floating cylinder, a drum-shaped object suspended motionless at the center of the cosmos. The inhabited part of this cylinder, the world known to the Greeks, was a single landmass, roughly circular, completely surrounded by the world ocean. This was a staggering leap of abstract thought. It was a model, a theoretical construct designed to explain the available evidence. He even suggested that the celestial bodies we see were not actually in the sky, but hidden within fiery rings encircling the Earth, their light only visible through vents in these cosmic wheels. This might sound strange to us now, but the methodology was what mattered. He was using observable phenomena to build a testable, rational model of the universe. His map, which sadly has not survived but is described by later writers, was the practical application of this theory. It was likely drawn on a bronze tablet or a piece of papyrus, and it depicted this known landmass encircled by the river Oceanus. But the real genius lay not in its shape, but in its method. Anaximander is credited with introducing the earliest concepts of latitude and longitude. He understood that the sun's position changed in a predictable way as one traveled north or south, and he used this to draw parallel lines across his map, dividing the world into climatic zones. He also attempted to use geometric principles to estimate distances between known locations, like the distance from the Danube River to the Pillars of Hercules. This was cartography as a form of applied mathematics. For the first time, the location of a place wasn't just about its relation to a holy city or a mythical landmark. It was a point that could be defined by a system of coordinates. This radical new approach did not emerge from a vacuum. Miletus was a thriving hub of trade and ideas, a place where Greek merchants rubbed shoulders with Egyptian sailors and Mesopotamian scholars. Anaximander was immersed in a soup of cross-cultural knowledge, but he filtered it through a uniquely Greek lens, a growing belief that the universe operated not on the whims of capricious gods, but according to discoverable, unchanging laws, a concept known as cosmos. His map was a declaration of that belief. It said, "The world is not mysterious and magical, it is orderly and can be understood through human reason." His work directly inspired his pupil, Hipparchus, who a generation later produced a more detailed map and a written commentary, the Periodos Gess, or Journey Around the Earth, which catalogued the peoples, cities, and customs of the known world with a new emphasis on empirical description, however flawed some of his accounts may have been. Anaximander's legacy is monumental. He represents that pivotal moment when the torch was passed from the priest to the philosopher, from the storyteller to the scientist. He established a tradition of critical inquiry and evidence-based representation that would become the bedrock of Western cartography. His insistence on using geometry and astronomy to ground geography in measurable reality created a foundation upon which every great mapmaker who followed would build, from Eratosthenes calculating the Earth's size to Ptolemy compiling his masterwork. He gave us the profound and powerful idea that the world, for all its vastness and complexity, could be measured, mapped, and understood. Now, consider the sheer scale of the challenge Eratosthenes set for himself. This was a man who ran the legendary Library of Alexandria, a repository of all known human knowledge, yet he wasn't satisfied with just reading about the world. He wanted to measure it. His genius lay in connecting two seemingly unrelated pieces of information that everyone else had overlooked. He had read an account that in the southern town of Syene, on the longest day of the year, the sun would be directly overhead at noon. Its light would illuminate the very bottom of a deep well, and a vertical object would cast no shadow whatsoever. This was a well-known local curiosity. But Eratosthenes, with his brilliant, synthesizing mind, wondered what that same sun was doing in his own city of Alexandria, some 500 miles to the north, on that exact same day and at that exact same time. So, on the summer solstice of 240 BCE, he decided to find out. He planted a vertical stick called a gnomon into the ground and waited for noon. As the sun reached its highest point, it did not shine directly overhead. Instead, it cast a clear, measurable shadow. This was the critical moment of insight. The difference in the sun's angle between the two cities, he reasoned, must be due to the curvature of the Earth itself. He measured the angle of that shadow in Alexandria with a simple surveying instrument called a merkit, and it came out to about 7.2 degrees. Now, 7.2 degrees is exactly 1/50th of a full 360-degree circle. This meant that the distance between Alexandria and Syene must represent 1/50th of the Earth's total circumference. It was a breathtaking leap of logic, a perfect marriage of astronomy and geometry. The final piece of the puzzle was the distance between the two cities. This is where his resources at the library likely came into play. He hired bematists, professional surveyors trained to measure distances by counting their paces with incredible accuracy. They calculated the land distance between Syene and Alexandria to be about 5,000 stadia. While the exact length of a stadion is debated by historians using the most common conversion, his final calculation gave him an Earth circumference of 252,000 stadia. Convert that into modern units, and he arrived at a figure of approximately 24,660 miles. The actual polar circumference is about 24,860 miles. Eratosthenes was off by less than 2%. This was an accuracy that would not be rivaled for over 1,000 years. He achieved this not with advanced technology, but with the power of a single, elegant idea. He understood that the Earth was a sphere, and he used the sun's rays, which arrive at Earth essentially parallel, as his giant measuring tool. The different shadow angles proved the curvature, and the known distance between the 2 points gave him the scale. The implications of this calculation were earth-shattering, quite literally. It was the first truly scientific, quantitative proof that the world was not flat, but a sphere of a known, finite size. This knowledge was revolutionary. It told explorers and mapmakers that the world was not an endless, terrifying void, but a measurable, knowable place. It gave them the confidence to estimate how long a journey might take, to conceptualize the relationships between continents and oceans on a global scale. Eratosthenes didn't just give them a number, he gave them a new worldview, one governed by mathematical law rather than myth. His work stands as a timeless monument to human curiosity, a brilliant demonstration that the greatest tools we possess are not made of metal, but of thought, observation, and the courage to connect the dots. Yet for all its brilliance, Eratosthenes' calculation of the Earth's size presented a new and even more daunting challenge for mapmakers. Knowing the circumference of a sphere is one thing, but how do you accurately place a city, a mountain, or a river on its surface? How do you create a map that others can reliably use and build upon? This was the monumental problem that confronted Hipparchus of Nicaea in the 2nd century BCE, and his solution was nothing less than the invention of the very grid system that underpins all modern cartography. He looked at the world and saw not just a sphere, but a blank canvas waiting for a set of coordinates. Hipparchus was, first and foremost, a master astronomer, perhaps the greatest of the ancient world. He spent years on the island of Rhodes meticulously observing the night sky, charting the precise positions of stars and planets, and even discovering the precession of the equinoxes, the slow, wobbling shift in Earth's rotational axis. This celestial obsession was the key to his terrestrial revolution. He understood that the same mathematical principles used to map the heavens could be applied to the Earth. Just as he could assign a fixed position to a star, he could assign a fixed position to a city. His genius was infusing these two fields into one seamless science. His system was breathtakingly simple and powerful. He took the Babylonian concept of dividing a circle into 360 degrees and applied it to the globe itself. He imagined a series of horizontal rings circling the planet parallel to the equator. These were the lines of latitude. He then imagined a series of vertical rings converging at the poles. These were the lines of longitude. This global grid created a web of imaginary lines that could pinpoint any location on Earth with just two numbers. To determine these numbers, he turned to his astronomical tools. Latitude was relatively straightforward. By measuring the angle of the North Star above the horizon or the length of the longest day of the year, a traveler or mapmaker could calculate their north-south position with surprising accuracy. Longitude, however, was the ancient world's impossible problem. Without an accurate clock, it was incredibly difficult to measure the time difference between one's location and a prime meridian. Hipparchus proposed an ingenious, though fiendishly difficult, workaround, using lunar eclipses. If observers in two different cities carefully recorded the exact local time a lunar eclipse began and ended, the difference between those times could be converted into a difference in longitude. It was a method that required incredible coordination and precision, but it was a start, a theoretical proof that the entire globe could be mathematically indexed. To make this system usable, Hipparchus began the Herculean task of compiling a master list of locations with their coordinates. He took the work of earlier geographers and critically evaluated it, correcting distances and directions based on astronomical data and more reliable traveler accounts. He wasn't just collecting data, he was standardizing it, creating a universal language of location that could transcend the subjective, often contradictory descriptions found in written travelogues. This shift from qualitative description to quantitative measurement was his most enduring legacy. A map was no longer just an artistic interpretation or a collection of stories. It was becoming a scientific document, a reproducible representation of space that could be verified, debated, and improved upon by anyone with the right knowledge and instruments. Perhaps his most practical contribution was his star catalogue. Recognizing that sailors and travelers needed a reliable celestial guide to find their way, he meticulously charted the positions and brightness of over 850 stars. This catalogue wasn't just a list, it was a tool for navigation. By comparing the observed night sky to his detailed charts, a navigator could better estimate their latitude and maintain their course. This work cemented the inseparable link between celestial and terrestrial navigation for centuries to come. Hipparchus gave the world a new pair of eyes. He provided the mathematical framework that allowed later giants like Ptolemy to create their detailed world maps and enabled the age of exploration that would eventually connect the globe. He taught us that to truly map the world, you first have to impose a grid upon the void, turning the chaos of an uncharted planet into an orderly system of numbers and angles. Yet for all his genius, Hipparchus's brilliant grid system remained a somewhat theoretical framework, a magnificent idea waiting for someone to compile the data, fill in the blanks, and create a practical guide for the entire world. That someone was Claudius Ptolemy, working in the great intellectual hub of Alexandria in the 2nd century CE. Ptolemy undertook a project of staggering ambition. He sought nothing less than to gather every shred of geographical knowledge from the entire Greek tradition and systematize it into a single, masterful work. The result was the Geographia, a book that would become the undisputed Bible of mapmaking for the next 1400 years, a testament to the power of compilation, organization, and sheer intellectual nerve. Ptolemy's approach was fundamentally different from a mere storyteller or a traveler sketching what he saw. He was a scientist, and he treated geography as a mathematical discipline. The Geographia was not primarily a collection of maps, it was a technical manual. Its opening volumes were devoted to the theory of cartography, including detailed instructions on how to draw a world map. His most enduring contribution here was the concept of map projection, the complex art of representing the curved surface of a sphere onto a flat sheet of paper. He proposed several methods, the most famous being the conic projection, where the globe is imagined as being viewed from a point above a pole, with the lines of latitude and longitude fanning out. This was a critical innovation. It acknowledged the Earth's true shape and provided a mathematical solution to the cartographer's oldest problem, creating a systematic way to reduce distortion and create a more faithful representation of the world. The real heart of the Geographia, however, was its vast catalogue. Ptolemy listed the latitude and longitude, the very coordinates Hipparchus had theorized, for over 8,000 places from the Canary Islands in the west to the Silk Road metropolis of Syra, likely in China in the east. He organized this massive dataset by region, providing not just coordinates but also brief descriptions of important topographical features like mountains and rivers. To use his book, a scholar would first study the theory of projection, then consult these extensive tables of locations, and finally, painstakingly plot each point by hand on a grid to reconstruct Ptolemy's vision of the world. It was the first ever connect-the-dots kit for building a global map, a revolutionary system that made cartography reproducible and accessible to anyone with the skill and patience to follow his instructions. This incredible work, however, was a double-edged sword. Ptolemy's greatest strength was also the source of his most significant errors. He was a compiler, not an explorer. He sat in the library of Alexandria, synthesizing the works of merchants, sailors, and earlier geographers like Marinus of Tyre. Much of his data was second-hand, outdated, or simply wrong. He dramatically underestimated the Earth's circumference, relying on a smaller, less accurate figure than Eratosthenes had calculated centuries before. This crucial mistake had a cascading effect. It made the world seem smaller, compressing the entire landmass of Asia and pushing the east coast of China much closer to the west coast of Europe. This error would echo through history, eventually convincing a certain Genos explorer named Christopher Columbus that a westward voyage to the Indies was a feasible undertaking. Ptolemy also overextended the Indian Ocean, depicting it as an enclosed sea with a great unknown continent, terra incognita, connecting southern Africa to Asia, effectively landlocking the Indian subcontinent. Yet, even with these flaws, the Geographia's influence is impossible to overstate. It introduced or standardized concepts that are the bedrock of modern cartography. It insisted on the use of scale to maintain proportional relationships between distances on the map and distances on the ground. It established consistent orientation, with north at the top and east to the right, a convention we still follow today. It used a coordinate system and a graticule of longitude and latitude lines. It even included the precursors to modern map legends, using symbols to denote different types of settlements, from metropolises to small villages. Ptolemy's work preserved the knowledge of the Greek Golden Age through Europe's Dark Ages. When his text was rediscovered and translated into Latin during the Renaissance, it hit the European intellectual world like a thunderclap, igniting a new age of discovery and providing the foundational model that cartographers like Mercator would strive to correct and improve. His legacy is a powerful reminder that progress is not always about being right, but about providing a structured, ambitious framework that others can challenge, test, and ultimately use to see further. While the Greek scholars of Alexandria were contemplating the curvature of the Earth and the mathematical poetry of celestial coordinates, a very different kind of cartographic genius was emerging to the West. The Romans looked at a map and asked a profoundly practical question. What is it for? Their answer reshaped the ancient world. For them, geography was not an abstract science to be pondered in a library. It was a tool of power, a mechanism for administration, and a vital artery for the relentless engine of their empire. They inherited the Greek theoretical foundation and then built upon it something entirely their own, a cartography of concrete utility designed to move legions, collect taxes, and bind a vast, diverse territory into a single, cohesive unit. The masterpiece of this pragmatic approach was the itinerarium. Forget the detailed, scaled maps we think of today. An itinerarium was less a picture and more a data table, a meticulously organized list of places, a logbook for the empire's roads. It functioned like the world's most advanced GPS if your GPS only gave you text directions. A traveler, say a military courier carrying dispatches from Britannia to Rome, would consult his itinerarium. It would tell him that from Londinium, the next major stop was Durovanium, 28 miles away. From there, it was another 33 miles to Rutupii, and so on, all the way to the capital. Each entry listed the mutations or posting stations where he could change his tired horse, and the mansions, the larger rest stops offering an inn and a bathhouse for the night. This was mapping stripped down to its most essential elements: where to go, how far it is, and where you can stop along the way. It was a system built for speed, reliability, and efficiency, the very principles that allowed Rome to govern an empire that stretched from the rainy highlands of Scotland to the sun-baked deserts of Syria. The most spectacular surviving glimpse into this Roman worldview is the Tabula Peutingeriana, or the Peutinger Table. This stunning document, a medieval copy of what was likely a 4th century Roman original, is a map that looks nothing like we expect. It is a long, narrow parchment scroll, over 22 feet long but only 1 foot high, resembling a schematic diagram for an ancient subway system. The Mediterranean Sea is compressed into a thin, horizontal blue ribbon, and the entire known world is distorted to fit this unique format. Distances are exaggerated, land masses are twisted, and the whole thing is wildly out of scale. And yet, for its intended purpose, it was perfect. It is the ultimate itinerarium in visual form. Every twist and turn of its vibrant red and yellow lines represents a road. Every little hook along those lines represents a way station, and every tiny drawing of a building represents a city. It charts over 200,000 kilometers of roads from Spain to India, and includes everything from the lighthouse of Alexandria to the temple of Jupiter in Rome. It wasn't meant to show the true shape of the world, but rather the connectivity of the empire. It answered the question, how do I get from here to there? With breathtaking clarity, this focus on the terrestrial and the immediate was also embodied by a crucial Roman professional, the agrimensor or land surveyor. As the legions conquered new territories, these men followed close behind, armed with their most trusted tool, the groma. This ingenious device, a cross-shaped instrument with plumb lines hanging from each arm, was used to sight perfectly straight lines and right angles across the landscape. With it, the agrimensors would lay out the iconic grid patterns of Roman colonies, dividing the land into precise square plots called centuries, FOR Chinese letter, veteran soldiers and settlers. These surveyed maps, carved into bronze or stone, were legal documents used to settle property disputes and calculate taxes. They were the foundation of Roman administration, transforming wild, conquered land into organized, productive, and taxable assets. The straight roads, the rectangular fields, and the orderly grid plans of countless modern European cities that began as Roman towns are all a permanent testament to the work of these practical mapmakers. The Roman contribution was a brilliant, necessary counterpoint to Greek theory. They showed that a map doesn't have to be cosmologically accurate to be profoundly useful. Their genius lay in understanding that different problems required different kinds of maps. For contemplating the universe, you had Ptolemy's celestial grid. For running an empire, you had a list of roads and a surveyor's plan. This pragmatic spirit ensured that cartography was not just a philosophy for scholars, but a tangible tool that shaped daily life, trade, and governance for millions. They took the science of geography and put it to work, creating a legacy of organization and efficiency that would influence how territories were managed for centuries to come, and paving the way for the unique map-making traditions that would soon emerge in other parts of the world. Far to the east, entirely isolated by formidable mountain ranges and vast deserts from the scholarly traditions of the Mediterranean, a parallel revolution in cartography was unfolding. In ancient China, the art and science of map-making blossomed along a completely independent path, one that reflected a unique philosophical worldview while achieving a level of administrative precision that rivaled anything in the West. Here, maps were not just tools for navigation or expressions of cosmic order. They were fundamental instruments of statecraft, essential for governing a massive, centralized empire, allocating agricultural land, and deploying armies across its vast and varied terrain. This pragmatic need for accuracy was beautifully balanced with a deep-seated spiritual belief in the harmony between heaven and earth, creating a cartographic tradition that was both mathematically rigorous and profoundly symbolic. Some of the earliest evidence of this sophisticated approach comes from the Qin and Han dynasties. In 1986, archaeologists made a stunning discovery in a tomb dating back to the 2nd century BCE, a set of 7 intricately drawn maps on silk. These weren't rough sketches, they were detailed representations of a specific region, featuring mountains, rivers, roads, and settlements, all drawn to a consistent scale. They used a standardized set of symbols, rectangles for counties, circles for villages, and even included carefully written annotations estimating the distances between points. This find was revolutionary. It proved that centuries before Ptolemy was compiling his lists of coordinates in Alexandria, Chinese officials were already producing highly accurate, scaled maps for administrative purposes, likely for tax collection and military logistics. They were using these documents to manage the empire not as an abstract concept, but as a tangible, measurable reality. The theoretical genius behind this practical tradition is embodied by one man, Pei Zhu, a minister and cartographer of the 3rd century CE. Living in a period of disunity after the fall of the Han dynasty, Pei Zhu looked at the maps of his time and found them wanting. He famously criticized them for their lack of proportional accuracy, their failure to correctly represent distances, and their inability to account for changes in elevation. In response, he formulated 6 essential principles of cartography, a set of rules that reads like a manifesto for scientific mapmaking. He insisted on the use of a consistent graduated scale, a grid of rectangular coordinates to ensure proportional accuracy, and methods for measuring the twisting, turning paths of roads and rivers. He emphasized the critical importance of correctly calculating direct versus travel distance, and perhaps most importantly, he stressed the need to accurately depict the rise and fall of the land, the mountains, valleys, and plains. Pei Zhu's principles provided the formal, mathematical backbone for Chinese cartography, ensuring that it was grounded in measurement and observation. Yet, for all this focus on earthly precision, Chinese maps were never purely secular documents. They were deeply infused with the cosmological concept of Tianxia, or all under heaven. This idea portrayed the Chinese Empire as the civilized center of the world, surrounded by concentric circles of increasingly barbaric peoples and lands, all of it resting under the dome of the heavens. This worldview was powerfully expressed in the Yujai Tu, or Map of the Tracks of Yu, a stone map carved in 1136. It is a masterpiece of the grid system Pei Zhu championed, incredibly accurate for its time, yet it is framed by text describing the legendary emperor Yu taming the floods and bringing order to the world. The map was both a practical tool and a political and spiritual statement, reinforcing the emperor's mandate of heaven and his role as the mediator between the celestial and the terrestrial realms. A map's orientation was also deeply significant, often being drawn with south at the top, not out of navigational necessity, but because the emperor, the son of heaven, was meant to look southward toward the sun, governing his subjects from this position of cosmic alignment. This unique tradition did not develop in a complete vacuum. The Silk Road, that legendary network of trade routes, acted as a slow, intermittent conduit for ideas. There is evidence that knowledge of Greek and Indian astronomy and geography trickled into China, and Chinese innovations, particularly in papermaking, eventually traveled west. However, this was not a simple case of one culture copying another. Chinese scholars absorbed these foreign concepts and then filtered them through their own distinct intellectual framework. They might adopt a mathematical technique or a new star chart, but they would apply it to serve their own administrative needs and philosophical beliefs. The result was a cartographic tradition that remained unmistakably Chinese in its style, purpose, and symbolism. The story of Chinese mapmaking is a vital reminder that human curiosity and intelligence are universal, but their expression is wonderfully diverse. It shows us that the drive to measure and represent our world is a fundamental human impulse, one that can lead to parallel yet beautifully distinct paths to understanding. While Europe was navigating through what later historians would call its dark ages, a brilliant intellectual dawn was breaking across the Islamic world. From the 8th to the 14th centuries, a vast region stretching from Cordoba in Spain to the edges of India became the epicenter of global scholarship, a place where knowledge was not just preserved but actively advanced. This era, known as the Islamic Golden Age, was fueled by a powerful drive for learning, a command of trade routes that connected 3 continents, and a cultural directive to seek knowledge as the Quran urged, even as far as China. For the science of mapmaking, this environment was nothing short of revolutionary. Rather than letting the great works of Greece and Rome fade into obscurity, Islamic scholars became their guardians, translators, and most brilliant critics. The process began with a monumental translation movement centered in Baghdad's legendary House of Wisdom. Caliphs sponsored teams of scholars to seek out and acquire ancient texts from the Byzantines, Persians, and Indians. Works by Ptolemy, whose Geographia was the crown jewel of Greek cartography, were translated into Arabic, studied, and meticulously copied. But these scholars were far more than mere librarians. They approached these ancient texts with a critical eye, checking their calculations, testing their claims against new empirical evidence, and correcting their errors. They recognized, for instance, that Ptolemy had drastically underestimated the size of the Earth's circumference. Using more advanced mathematical techniques and better data gathered from across their empire, they produced far more accurate figures, which in turn allowed for the creation of maps that were less distorted and more faithful to reality. This commitment to empirical accuracy was supercharged by the flow of new information. The Islamic Caliphate sat astride the world's most vibrant trade networks. Merchants, pilgrims, and diplomats traveled from Mali to Malaysia, and they brought back incredibly detailed accounts of the world. Geographers like al-Masudi and Ibn Battuta compiled these first-hand reports into encyclopedic texts, describing the coastlines of Africa, the islands of Southeast Asia, and the vastness of the Eurasian steppe with a level of detail the classical world had never possessed. This torrent of new data demanded a new kind of map, one that could synthesize the theoretical framework of the Greeks with the hard-won, practical knowledge of travelers. No one embodied this synthesis better than the extraordinary geographer Muhammad al-Idrisi. In the 12th century, he found a patron in Roger Roman II, the Norman king of Sicily, a crossroads of Christian, Muslim, and Jewish culture. For 15 years, al-Idrisi directed a project of staggering ambition. He interviewed travelers, cross-referenced existing maps, and sent out teams to verify distances and features. The result was the Tabula Rogeriana, completed in 1154. This was not just a map, it was a comprehensive geographical compendium, accompanied by a book detailing the physical, cultural, and political realities of the world's 7 climates. His world map, oriented with south at the top, was the most accurate representation of the world for the next 3 centuries. It correctly showed the source of the Nile, the shape of the Caspian Sea, and the connections of major mountain ranges, seamlessly blending Ptolemaic structure with entirely new information. Beyond compiling knowledge, Islamic scholars revolutionized the very tools of measurement. They took the Greek astrolabe and refined it into a precision instrument of breathtaking complexity and beauty. This handheld astronomical computer could tell the time, calculate latitudes, determine the direction of Mecca for prayer, and even forecast the positions of the stars. Similarly, they improved the quadrant and the celestial globe, making celestial navigation and terrestrial surveying more accurate than ever before. Their contributions to mathematics were just as critical. They adopted and perfected the Indian numeral system, including the life-changing concept of zero, providing cartographers with a powerful new language for calculation. They made significant advances in spherical trigonometry, the complex mathematics required to accurately project the curved surface of the Earth onto a flat map. This mathematical prowess allowed them to refine the coordinate systems pioneered by Hipparchus and Ptolemy, creating more sophisticated graticules and map projections that minimized distortion. The legacy of this golden age is impossible to overstate. At a time when much of Europe had lost touch with its classical heritage, Islamic scholars were the vital link. They preserved the foundational texts of geography, not in a dusty archive, but in a vibrant, living tradition of critique and improvement. When Europe began to reawaken during the Renaissance, it was often through Latin translations of Arabic commentaries on Greek texts. The maps of Al-Idrisi and others directly influenced European cartographers on the cusp of the Age of Discovery. This was not a simple handoff, but a powerful demonstration of how human progress is a collaborative, cross-cultural endeavor. Innovation did not spring from a single source but flourished at the bustling intersection of diverse ideas, where the logic of Greek geometry met the observational data of Arab and Persian travelers, all refined by advanced Indian mathematics. This tradition of preservation and fearless enhancement ensured that the torch of ancient knowledge was not extinguished but was instead carried forward, burning ever brighter to illuminate the path for future generations. If you were to step into a great medieval cathedral or monastery library around the year 1300, you might have encountered a map that would seem utterly bewildering to our modern eyes. It wouldn't help you find the quickest route to the next town or navigate a ship across the Mediterranean. Instead, it would show you a perfect circle of lands with a single, holy city sitting at its very heart. East was at the top, where the Garden of Eden was often depicted, separated from the world by a ring of fire. The continents were distorted into strange shapes, populated not just by cities and rivers, but by scenes from the Bible, mythical beasts like the Bonacon and the Cyapod, and the monstrous races said to inhabit the Earth's furthest edges. This was a mappa mundi, a map of the world, and its purpose was not to guide the body but to save the soul. The most famous surviving example is the magnificent Hereford Mappa Mundi, a masterpiece drawn on a single, large sheet of vellum around the year 1300. To view it is to take a journey through the entire medieval Christian mind. Jerusalem is the literal center of the universe, reflecting the deep theological belief that the city was the spiritual focal point of human history, the site of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. Radiating out from this sacred center is a sprawling encyclopedia of everything known or believed about the world. You can find the Tower of Babel, the Labyrinth of Crete, and the Golden Fleece. The edges are populated with monstrous creatures described by ancient authors like Pliny the Elder, beings with one giant foot they could use as a sunshade, or men with their faces on their chests. This was not a failure of geography, it was a triumph of theology. The map was a visual sermon, a teaching tool designed to illustrate the history of humankind from the fall in Eden to the potential for salvation. It placed every event, every creature, and every place within a single divine narrative, organizing a vast and often terrifying universe into a coherent, God-centered whole. This symbolic approach stood in stark contrast to the scientific, measurement-driven cartography of the Greek and Roman eras, where Ptolemy sought to project the spherical Earth onto a grid of coordinates. The creators of the Mappae Mundi sought to project the story of salvation onto parchment. Accuracy, in our modern sense, was irrelevant. The relative size and distance between places mattered far less than their spiritual significance. A location mentioned in the Bible might be drawn much larger than a major European city simply because of its importance in Scripture. The map was a diagram of faith, not a tool for travel. It answered the question, what is the world? Not with measurements, but with meaning, revealing a world view where the physical and the spiritual were completely intertwined. Yet, even in this age of profound symbolism, a powerful and pragmatic cartographic tradition was simultaneously flourishing, born from the urgent, practical needs of commerce and survival at sea. While monks in scriptoria were illustrating Mappae Mundi, anonymous draftsmen in port cities like Genoa and Venice were creating something entirely different, the Portolan chart. These navigational maps, drawn on parchment and crisscrossed with a spiderweb of rheum lines radiating from compass roses, were marvels of empirical accuracy. They focused exclusively on coastlines, harbors, and treacherous shoals, providing sailors with the critical information they needed to navigate the dangerous waters of the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. The names of ports were written perpendicular to the coast, densely packed to maximize detail. The accuracy of these charts, achieved without any use of celestial navigation or complex mathematics, remains somewhat mysterious. They were almost certainly based on the accumulated, first-hand experience of countless mariners, the pilots and captains who knew the seas intimately. Their knowledge was compiled and synthesized into these remarkably reliable documents, which were used alongside the magnetic compass for dead reckoning navigation. The contrast couldn't be more dramatic. In the same era, one map might show Jerusalem surrounded by dog-headed men, while another could guide a ship safely into a specific harbor with precision we would recognize today. This duality captures the fascinating tension of the medieval mind, perfectly capable of holding both devout symbolic belief and sharp practical empiricism in balance, using different maps for starkly different human purposes. And so, while the great Mappae Mundi hung in cathedrals, telling a grand story of faith and creation, a very different kind of map was being unrolled on the swaying decks of merchant cogs and war galleys in the bustling ports of Genoa, Venice, and Majorca. These were the Portolan charts, and they were not concerned with saving souls, but with saving ships. Crafted from sheepskin or goatskin parchment for durability against salt spray and rough handling, these were working documents, the indispensable navigational computers of their day. Their most striking feature is the web of lines that seems to explode from multiple points across the surface. These are rheum lines, and they were the chart's brilliant, practical heart. A sailor would line up his course between two ports using these fixed lines and then, using his magnetic compass, simply maintain that same bearing across the open water. It was a system of stunning simplicity and effectiveness, a product of hands-on experience rather than scholarly theory. The accuracy of these charts, particularly for the well-traveled Mediterranean, is nothing short of astonishing. Coastlines are rendered with a precision that seems to defy their era, with every bay, headland, and river mouth carefully inscribed. The names of ports are written in a dense script, perpendicular to the coastline, cramming in as much vital information as possible. These weren't based on celestial calculations or a mathematical grid of latitude and longitude. They were born from the accumulated, hard-won knowledge of generations of mariners. Pilots and captains would contribute their own sketches and mental maps of coastlines, distances, and hidden hazards like reefs and sandbars. This collective wisdom was then synthesized by skilled draftsmen in workshops, creating a master chart that could be copied and sold to other sailors. It was crowd-sourced navigation centuries before the term was invented, a living database of empirical knowledge passed down through ink and vellum. The origin of these revolutionary tools is one of cartography's great puzzles. They seem to appear almost fully formed in the 13th century, with no clear evolutionary predecessors. This has led to fascinating theories about their genesis. Some scholars point to the advanced navigational knowledge of Arab sailors, who were masters of the Indian Ocean and Mediterranean trade routes, using their own detailed sailing instructions known as romanes. Could European cartographers have encountered and adapted these ideas? Others suggest a link to the Byzantine Empire, which preserved much classical knowledge and maintained a powerful navy. Perhaps the true origin lies in a lost tradition of simple, perishable sketch charts used by local pilots. which were never deemed important enough to save until a master draftsman combined them into a single, magnificent whole. The mystery only adds to their allure, a testament to the anonymous genius of practical minds. What makes the Portolan chart so revolutionary is its pure, unadulterated focus on the practical reality of getting from one point to another. It completely ignores the interior of continents. There are no mountains, cities, or mythical beasts here. Its world is a universe of coastlines, a guide to the edges where sea meets land, because that was the only part that mattered to the man at the helm. This empirical, experience-based approach proved that you didn't need to understand the mathematical principles of a spherical Earth or the complex motion of the stars to create a profoundly accurate and useful map. You just needed careful observation, a commitment to recording true facts, and the skill to translate that knowledge into a clear visual language. This fusion of artisan craftsmanship and collective seafaring intelligence created a tool so reliable that it would give European sailors the confidence to push beyond the familiar confines of the Mediterranean, venturing down the coast of Africa and out into the terrifying vastness of the Atlantic Ocean, ultimately paving the way for the voyages that would forever change the map of the world. Across the vast ocean, separated by thousands of miles of water from the traditions of Europe and Asia, the great civilizations of the Americas were developing their own breathtakingly unique ways of understanding and representing space. Without the wheel, without large draft animals to pull carts or plows, and working with a completely different set of natural resources, the Inca and the Maya forged a cartography that was less about drawing lines on parchment and more about weaving space into the very fabric of their culture, architecture, and memory. Theirs was a mapping of the mind, the body, and the spirit, a testament to human ingenuity adapting to a world of mountains, jungles, and complex spiritual beliefs. High in the Andes, the Inca Empire mastered the art of organizing a vertical world. Their territory was a staggering tapestry of mountain peaks, deep valleys, and steep slopes, a geography that would seem impossible to administer. Yet they did so with breathtaking efficiency, and their primary tool for recording information might be one of the most fascinating in history, the quipu. At first glance, a quipu is a collection of colored, knotted strings hanging from a central cord, but to a trained Inca administrator, it was a sophisticated data storage device. The colors of the strings, the types of knots, and their positions could encode vast amounts of numerical information, census data, tax records, and inventories of storehouses. While no surviving quipu has been definitively decoded as a map, the concept is profound. It is easy to imagine how such a system could record geographical information, the number of days' journey between towns, the population of a specific valley, or the supplies available at a way station along their immense road network. This road system was the physical manifestation of their spatial genius. Over 25,000 miles of paved trails connected the empire, traversing impossible geography with stone stairways cut into cliff faces and suspension bridges woven from grass fiber spanning raging rivers. Every so often, a tambo or relay station provided rest and supplies for the imperial runners who carried messages. This entire infrastructure, the roads, the stations, the runners, formed a living, breathing map of the empire, a network of relationships and distances that was constantly traveled and experienced rather than simply looked at. The city of Cusco, the navel of the Inca world, is perhaps their greatest cartographic masterpiece. It was not just a city, it was a giant-scale map of their cosmology. The city was designed in the shape of a puma, a sacred animal, with the fortress of Sacsayhuaman forming its head and the confluence of two rivers marking its tail. Radiating out from the central temple, the Coricancha, were 41 invisible lines called sects. These were not physical roads but conceptual lines that organized the entire sacred and social geography of the valley. Along each sec were specific huacas or sacred shrines, a spring, a peculiar rock formation, a tomb that had to be visited and maintained in a specific order. This system created a ritual landscape, a map of religious duty and cosmic order that every priest and noble would have memorized. The city itself, its shape, and its invisible lines were a three-dimensional map of Inca spiritual beliefs, a permanent representation of their universe etched directly into the land. Meanwhile, in the steamy lowlands of Mesoamerica, the Maya were developing a cartographic tradition that was deeply intertwined with their sacred texts and complex calendar system. Their maps were not separate documents but integral parts of their screen-fold books known as codices. These maps were deeply narrative. They didn't just show where places were, they told the story of those places, weaving together geography, mythology, and history into a single rich tapestry. A map might show the path of a mythical hero's journey, with each location marked not by a dot but by a symbolic glyph representing the event that happened there, a birth, a battle, a divine encounter. The landscape itself was often alive, with wavy lines representing not just water but the concept of wits, the sacred, animate mountain. Theirs was a world where place and event were inseparable, and their maps reflected this holistic view. The famous Madrid Codex, for example, contains what scholars call a map of the four directions, but it is so much more. It is a diagram of the entire Maya cosmos, associating specific gods, colors, trees, and birds with each cardinal point. This was a functional, spiritual map used by daykeepers and priests for divination and ritual. It organized space in time, linking directions to periods of the year and the deities that held sway over them. For the Maya, to know a place was to know its story, its divine patrons, and its place in the cyclical flow of time. This approach required an incredible feat of spatial memory, a mental mapping of immense complexity that was passed down through generations of trained scribes and priests. The tragic burning of thousands of these codices by Spanish friars means we have only a precious few fragments of this rich tradition left, mere glimpses into a lost world of cartographic thought. What unites these American traditions is their radical difference from the measured grids of a Ptolemy or the practical itineraria of Rome. They were not based on geometry and coordinates but on relationship and narrative. The Inca mapped through movement and memory along their road systems and through the ritual maintenance of the sec lines. The Maya mapped through story and symbol, embedding geography within their historical and prophetic texts. They remind us that a map is not inherently a picture. It can be a knot on a string, a road underfoot, a city shaped like a puma, or a prophecy in a book. They achieved a profound understanding of their world using the materials and concepts most meaningful to them, proving that the drive to map our place in the universe is a universal human impulse, even if the methods are as diverse as the cultures themselves. But how did they actually do it? How did they translate grand theories and observations into precise lines on a map or a tablet? The answer lies in a collection of remarkably clever devices, the physical extensions of their brilliant minds. These were the tools of the trade, crafted from wood, bronze, and stone, each one a testament to human ingenuity in the face of immense technological limitations. To understand ancient mapmaking is to appreciate these instruments, not as primitive curiosities, but as the sophisticated technology of their day, enabling a level of precision that still commands our respect. For the land surveyor, whether a Greek planner or a Roman agrimencer, the challenge was always the same: how to impose perfect geometry onto the messy, unpredictable landscape. The Greeks had their dioptra, a complex and versatile instrument that was the ancient world's equivalent of a modern theodolite or transit. It consisted of a circular sighting tube mounted on a stand, which could be rotated and tilted with screw adjustments. By peering through this tube, an operator could sight a distant point with incredible accuracy. It could measure horizontal and vertical angles, level a plane, or even align stars for astronomical observations. With patience and skill, a team using a dioptra could chart the course of a river, plot the contours of a hill, or lay out the foundation for an entire city with geometric perfection. It was the workhorse of precision engineering, a device that turned the art of measurement into a true science. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, favored a different but equally effective tool for their legendary road building and land division, the groma. This device was the embodiment of Roman efficiency. Imagine a vertical staff with a horizontal crossarm mounted on top. From each end of the crossarm, a plumb bob hung on a string. The surveyor would plant the staff in the ground and then carefully adjust it until two opposing plumb bobs lined up perfectly with a reference point behind them. Once this precise alignment was achieved, the two other plumb bobs would point exactly 90 degrees to the side. Just like that, the surveyor had established a perfect right angle. Marching forward with measuring rods, they could then lay out the iconic grid patterns of Roman towns and the impossibly straight lines of their roads that stretched for miles across hills and valleys. The groma was simple, portable, and utterly reliable, the perfect tool for an empire built on order and straight lines. Out on the open sea or in the deep desert, where land-based references vanished, ancient navigators and mapmakers turned their gaze upward to the sun and stars. Their most vital tool for this was the astrolabe, a breathtakingly complex brass computer that condensed the entire known universe onto a handheld disk. More than just a navigational aid, it was a model of the celestial sphere, a star chart, a timepiece, and a calculator all in one. By aligning the movable components with a specific star or the sun, a user could determine the time, calculate their latitude, or even forecast the rising and setting of celestial bodies. Its cousin, the simpler quadrant, performed a similar function by measuring the angle of a star above the horizon. A mariner would sight the North Star along the quadrant's edge and read the angle from a graduated scale, giving him a direct measurement of his latitude. These instruments transformed the vast, trackless sky into a dependable clockwork map. For measuring the often tedious distances between all these carefully plotted points, ancient travelers had a clever solution, the odometer. Described by the Roman architect Vitruvius, this was a marvel of geared mechanics. Imagine a small cart whose wheel was precisely calibrated to the Roman standard of 1 passus, or double step. As the wheel turned, it engaged a series of gears. For every Roman mile traveled about 4,860 feet, a gear would complete a full rotation and drop a single pebble into a metal bin. At the end of a day's journey, the traveler simply counted the pebbles to know exactly how far they had gone. It was an automatic, mechanical counter that provided the crucial data for the distance tables found in Roman itineraries. And underpinning so many of these calculations, from Eratosthenes' great experiment to a sailor's noon sighting, was the most humble tool of all, the shadow stick or gnomon. This was nothing more than a vertical rod planted in level ground, but by meticulously tracking the length and direction of its shadow throughout the day and across the seasons, an observer could determine true north, mark the solstices and equinoxes, tell the time of day, and even estimate their latitude. The sundial was simply a calibrated, permanent version of this same principle. These tools, requiring no moving parts or metalworking, were the fundamental bedrock of ancient timekeeping and positional astronomy. They prove that the most profound discoveries often begin with the simplest observations. and that the greatest tool a mapmaker possessed was not made of bronze, but of patience, curiosity, and a willingness to learn the language of light and shadow. Yet for all their brilliance in measuring the Earth and mapping the stars, the ancient world faced a navigational puzzle so profound it would remain unsolved for centuries: the problem of longitude. Imagine you're a ship's captain in the classical era. You can look to the heavens and, by the height of the North Star or the sun at its zenith, know precisely how far north or south you are, your latitude. This was the easy part, but knowing how far east or west you had traveled, your longitude, was an entirely different matter, a riddle that would baffle the greatest minds from Ptolemy to Galileo and become the single greatest obstacle to accurate global mapping. The core of the problem was deceptively simple: time. The Earth rotates 360 degrees every 24 hours, which means it turns 15 degrees every single hour. Therefore, if you can know the exact time at a fixed reference point, like your home port, and simultaneously know the exact local time wherever you are, you can calculate your longitude. A 1-hour time difference equals 15 degrees of longitude. The challenge, of course, was that no clock existed that could keep accurate time on a rolling, pitching ship through changes in temperature and humidity for weeks or months on end. The pendulum clocks that worked so well on land were useless at sea. Without this portable, precise timekeeper, a sailor was literally lost in time and therefore lost in space. His east-west position was little more than a desperate guess, a calculation based on the unreliable log of how fast and for how long he thought he had been sailing, a method known as dead reckoning that could accumulate errors with every passing day, sometimes with disastrous consequences. This wasn't just a theoretical inconvenience, it was a practical nightmare that warped the very shape of the world on ancient maps. Cartographers like Ptolemy, working in the library at Alexandria, had to rely on the wildly inconsistent reports from travelers to estimate east-west distances. One merchant might claim a journey took 20 days on a fast horse along a good road, while another might report 30 days on foot through mountainous terrain. These estimates of travel time were then converted into distance and plotted on a map, creating a cumulative error that could stretch or compress entire continents. This is a primary reason why Ptolemy's map, for all its mathematical elegance, shows a dramatically shrunken Atlantic Ocean and a vast, overextended Asia errors that would later tempt Columbus with the seemingly short voyage to the Indies. Some of the most brilliant minds in history attempted to find a celestial solution, bypassing the need for a clock altogether. The Greek astronomer Hipparchus himself had proposed using lunar eclipses as a universal clock. If observers in two different cities could carefully record the local time when a lunar eclipse began and ended, the difference between those times could be converted into a difference in longitude. In theory, it was brilliant. In practice, it was nearly impossible. Eclipses are rare events, and requiring coordinated observations from distant, often unknown parts of the world was utterly impractical for a sailor in the middle of the ocean. Later, navigators tried the lunar distance method, which involved meticulously measuring the angle between the moon and a specific star. Because the moon moves predictably against the backdrop of stars, this angle could be used to look up the current time at a prime meridian in a pre-calculated nautical almanac. But the mathematics was fiendishly complex. The observations required a stable platform and perfect weather, and the necessary tables were often incomplete or inaccurate. For the ancient and medieval mariner, these methods were like trying to perform advanced calculus on the deck of a storm-tossed ship. So they made do with what they had, and the maps reflected this fundamental limitation. Portolan charts, for all their stunning accuracy in depicting the familiar coastlines of the Mediterranean, were essentially useless for determining longitude in the open Atlantic. They were a testament to accumulated experience, not celestial calculation. The longitudinal placement of new discoveries, like the Azores or the Cape Verde Islands, was often a best guess, leading to archipelagos wandering across the ocean on subsequent maps as more reports trickled in. This great longitudinal unknown made the oceans terrifyingly vast and the world frustratingly unknowable in its true proportions. It was the final, formidable lock on the door of global exploration, and the key would not be found in the stars, but in the workshop of an English clockmaker named John Harrison millennia later. His marine chronometer finally solved the puzzle, but its very necessity underscores the immense, humbling challenge that defined and limited the incredible achievements of the ancient mapmakers. For all their breathtaking accuracy in some areas, ancient maps were equally defined by their spectacular and persistent errors. These weren't just simple miscalculations, they were entire phantom continents, misplaced oceans, and kingdoms of pure imagination that became embedded in the geographical record, often for centuries. This fascinating dance between fact and fiction wasn't a failure of cartography, but an inevitable part of the process. Mapmakers were working with a patchwork of sources, a merchant's boastful tale here, a decades-old sailor's log there, all filtered through the powerful lens of cultural expectation and enduring myth. The results were maps that were as much a record of human hopes and fears as they were of coastlines and rivers. Perhaps the most consequential error in history was Ptolemy's significant overestimation of the size of Asia. In his brilliant Geographia, he calculated the landmass stretching from Europe to the Far East as being far larger than it actually was, while simultaneously underestimating the Earth's circumference. This had a dramatic effect. It made the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, unknown to Europe at the time, completely disappear from the map. In Ptolemy's world, the Atlantic Ocean was all that separated the western tip of Europe from the eastern edge of Asia. This single, powerful idea, preserved in libraries for over a millennium, planted a seed in the mind of a Genos navigator named Christopher Columbus. Armed with this flawed Ptolemaic vision, Columbus became convinced that a westward voyage to the spice-rich Indies was not only possible but practical. His famous journey in 1492 was a direct attempt to prove this map right. Of course, he didn't find Asia. Instead, he stumbled upon an entirely new world that his maps had never accounted for, a monumental discovery born entirely from a 1,500-year-old mistake. Beyond mathematical errors, maps were also fertile ground for pure legend. For centuries, cartographers dutifully inscribed the kingdom of Prester John onto their maps of Africa or Asia. This mythical Christian king, ruling a lost empire of immense wealth and piety, was a figure of hope for a Europe threatened by powerful Islamic caliphates. He was a phantom ally, and his persistent presence on maps wasn't about geography, it was about ideology. It gave European powers a spiritual and strategic reason to push into unknown territories, hoping to make contact with this powerful potential friend. Similarly, the great southern continent of Terra Australis Incognita was considered a cartographic certainty. Ancient Greek philosophers had reasoned that a large landmass must exist in the southern hemisphere to balance the weight of the northern continents. This logical but entirely theoretical deduction became a fixture on maps, growing in size and detail with each copy. It wasn't just an empty space, it was often drawn as a rich, fertile paradise waiting to be discovered. This phantom continent beckoned explorers for generations, motivating voyages that would eventually chart the real Australia and Antarctica, but only after centuries of searching for a place that never existed as drawn. The process of correcting these errors was painstakingly slow. A map's authority was powerful, and a single explorer's contradictory report was often dismissed as an anomaly or a lie. It took multiple voyages by different captains, returning with consistent accounts, to slowly chip away at a centuries-old cartographic belief. The coastline of Terra Australis would gradually recede from maps over hundreds of years, shrinking from a massive continent to a smaller outline, and eventually vanishing altogether as the true patchwork of islands and the frozen continent of Antarctica were revealed. This was how cartography truly advanced, not in sudden, clear revelations, but through a messy, incremental process of debate, verification, and the courageous, often perilous, work of explorers willing to sail off the edge of the known world, testing the promises of their maps against the unforgiving reality of the ocean. These maps, in their glorious inaccuracy, didn't just record the world, they actively created it. They shaped ambition, directed national policy, and launched ships into the void on quests that would forever change the course of history, proving that sometimes being wrong can be the most powerful catalyst for discovery imaginable. It's almost impossible to look at a modern digital map on our phones with its instant positioning, real-time traffic updates, and satellite imagery, and feel any connection to a clay tablet from Babylon or a Greek philosopher staring at the shadow of a stick. But that connection is not just there, it is the very bedrock upon which our entire modern understanding of geography is built. The legacy of those ancient mapmakers is not a dusty relic in a museum. It is alive in every pixel of our GPS screens, in the flight paths of aircraft, and in the way we fundamentally conceptualize our place on this planet. They handed down to us not just specific tools, but an entire way of thinking about space, measurement, and representation. Consider the most basic framework of any modern map, the grid of latitude and longitude. This global addressing system, which allows us to pinpoint any location on Earth with just 2 numbers, is a direct inheritance from the 2nd century BCE. It was Hipparchus of Nicaea who first proposed this coordinate system, dividing the world into 360 degrees. While his instruments were rudimentary compared to today's satellites, the core mathematical principle is identical. When your phone tells you that you're at 40.712 degrees north, 74.006 degrees west, it is speaking the language Hipparchus helped invent. The concept of projecting our spherical Earth onto a flat surface is another ancient gift. Claudius Ptolemy's Geographia was essentially a detailed instruction manual for different map projections, teaching cartographers how to wrestle with the inherent distortion of flattening a globe. The mathematical challenges he tackled are the very same ones that software engineers solve today to make the maps on our screens look accurate and navigable. Every time you look at a map on a website like Google Maps, which uses a specific projection to make the world look right at a global scale, you are seeing the evolved solution to a 2,000-year-old problem. But the legacy is far more profound than just technical conventions. The ancient Greeks, particularly Eratosthenes, established the foundational scientific ethos of cartography, that the world can be understood through careful observation, meticulous measurement, and the application of mathematics. This commitment to an evidence-based approach is the cornerstone of all modern geographic information science. Today's cartographers might use LiDAR scanning from airplanes and radar altimetry from satellites instead of shadow sticks and bematists counting their paces, but the underlying goal is unchanged: to collect accurate data about the physical world and translate it into a reliable model. The scientific method they pioneered is what allows us to trust that a bridge drawn on a map will be there when we arrive, or that the elevation data for a hiking trail is correct. Perhaps one of the most poignant lessons from ancient maps is their powerful reminder that no map is ever truly objective. the Babylonian world map with Babylon at its center, and the medieval Mappa Mundi, with Jerusalem as the focal point of creation, teach us that every map is created by a culture with its own priorities, biases, and worldview. A map is always a representation, not reality itself. This is an incredibly relevant lesson in our age of digital mapping and data visualization. The algorithms that decide what appears on your screen when you search for coffee near me are making subjective choices, just as the ancient mapmakers did when they chose to place their holy city at the center of the universe. The way crime data or electoral results are visualized on a modern map can tell a story that is just as powerful and potentially manipulative as any ancient cosmological diagram. Understanding this history makes us more critical, more literate consumers of the maps we use every day, reminding us to ask who made this, what choices did they make, and what story are they trying to tell. Furthermore, the very challenges that stumped the ancients became the driving force for the technologies we now take for granted. The longitude problem, which plagued sailors and mapmakers for 2 millennia, creating countless shipwrecks and misdrawn coastlines, was the direct ancestor of our modern GPS. The quest to solve this puzzle led to the development of increasingly precise clocks, which in turn revolutionized timekeeping and physics. Eventually, the solution came from above, a constellation of satellites, each with an atomic clock precisely synchronized, broadcasting their time and position. Your phone receives these signals and, by calculating the tiny differences in the time they arrive, triangulates your exact position on that ancient Hipparchian grid. The global positioning system is, in a very real sense, the final, glorious answer to the longitude problem. It is the culmination of a quest that began when the first sailor lost sight of land and wondered how far east or west he had drifted. Every time we use turn-by-turn navigation, we are benefiting from a struggle that spanned centuries, a testament to the enduring human drive to solve a problem first identified by the mapmakers of antiquity. By studying these ancient methods, we gain far more than just historical trivia. We gain a deep appreciation for the sheer human ingenuity that unfolded without any of our modern advantages. It fosters a sense of humility and wonder, knowing that the circumference of the Earth was calculated with astonishing accuracy using little more than geometry, sunlight, and a determined intellect. This legacy connects us directly to that past, showing that our modern, hyper-technological world is not a separate entity, but is built layer upon layer on millennia of curiosity, perseverance, and a fundamental desire to understand the world around us. Their wisdom informs our practices not through specific techniques, but through the enduring spirit of inquiry. They established a spirit that continues to push the boundaries of how we see and map our world, and even worlds beyond our own. For centuries, the magnificent works of Ptolemy and other Greek geographers had lain dormant in Europe, their knowledge preserved not in the great libraries of the West, but in the thriving intellectual centers of the Islamic world. Then, in the early 15th century, a seismic shift began. A wave of scholarly fervor, now known as the Renaissance, was washing over Italy, and with it came a desperate hunger for the lost wisdom of the classical past. This hunger would not be satisfied by European libraries, which held only fragments and poor copies of these foundational texts. The real treasure troves were elsewhere. Byzantine scholars fleeing the advancing Ottoman Empire began arriving in Italian city-states like Venice and Florence, carrying with them precious manuscripts that had been safeguarded in Constantinople for a millennium. These weren't just any books, they were pristine Greek copies of Ptolemy's Geographia, a text that most European scholars had only heard of in legendary terms. At almost the same time, another vital conduit of knowledge was opening up. In the trading hubs of the Mediterranean, particularly after the fall of Granada in 1492, European scholars gained access to a vast corpus of Arabic texts. For centuries, Islamic cartographers and commentators had not only preserved Ptolemy's work, but had meticulously corrected, critiqued, and expanded upon it. Figures like al-Idrisi had integrated new knowledge from Arab and Persian travelers, creating maps that were far more accurate for regions like the Indian Ocean and Africa than anything the classical world had produced. When these Arabic versions, along with their extensive commentaries, were translated into Latin, it was like a thunderclap. European thinkers were suddenly presented with a complete, sophisticated system of scientific geography that they never knew they had lost, now returned to them enriched with centuries of additional insight. This double rediscovery from the Greek East and the Arabic South ignited a cartographic revolution. The impact was immediate and profound. For the first time, European mapmakers had a proper user's manual for the world. Ptolemy's Geographia provided them with two priceless gifts: a global grid of latitude and longitude, and detailed instructions on how to project the spherical Earth onto a flat sheet of parchment or paper. This provided a rigorous mathematical framework that was utterly lacking in the symbolic mappae mundi of the medieval period. Cartographers like the German scholar Johannes Reich eagerly adopted this Ptolemaic model. His world map of 1507 is a fascinating hybrid, a beautiful collision of old and new. It proudly displays the newly discovered coasts of Newfoundland, courtesy of recent English and Portuguese voyages, but it forces this new information into a stubbornly Ptolemaic frame, still showing Asia curving far to the east and clinging to the idea of an enclosed Indian Ocean. It was a clear, if awkward, attempt to make the exciting but confusing new discoveries of the age of exploration fit into the authoritative, ancient classical model. This tension between ancient authority and modern observation defined the era. A new breed of scholar began to emerge, one who respected Ptolemy's methods but trusted their own eyes more. The most famous of these was the Flemish cartographer Gerardus Mercator. He saw the genius in Ptolemy's projections, but also recognized their flaws for the new age of ocean-going navigation. In 1569, he unveiled his own monumental innovation, a new projection designed specifically for sailors. The Mercator projection used straight, parallel lines of longitude, which meant a sailor could plot a course as a straight line on the map and maintain a constant compass bearing to follow it. It was a masterpiece of practical mathematics that solved a real-world problem, yet its very conception was rooted in the Greco-Arab tradition of mathematical geography that the Renaissance had resurrected. Mercator didn't discard the ancients, he stood on their shoulders to see further. Crucially, this rebirth of knowledge could not have spread without a parallel technological revolution, the invention of the movable type printing press. For the first time in history, maps could be mass-produced with incredible accuracy. No longer were they unique, hand-painted artifacts locked away in the libraries of princes and popes. Printed editions of Ptolemy's Geographia, complete with beautifully engraved maps, became bestsellers among an emerging educated class. This wide dissemination meant that a merchant in Lisbon, a scholar in Krakow, and a ship's captain in Bristol could all be looking at the same standardized depiction of the world. It created a common geographical language and a shared sense of possibility, directly fueling the ambitions of explorers and the monarchs who funded them. The maps themselves became objects of art and science, adorned with elaborate cartouches, detailed renderings of sailing ships, and figures representing the winds, blending the humanist artistry of the Renaissance with a newfound scientific rigor. This period of rediscovery did more than just update the world map. It fundamentally changed the European mindset. It fostered a renewed confidence in human reason and observation. The message of the Renaissance cartographers was clear. We are not mere recipients of knowledge from the past or from divine revelation. We are active participants in the discovery of our world. We can test ancient claims, we can verify them with our own journeys, and we can improve upon them with our own intellect. This shift from deference to inquiry, from accepting tradition to demanding empirical evidence, was the true catalyst for the great age of discovery that followed. The reborn maps of Ptolemy and his peers did not provide all the answers, but they gave Europe the right questions and, for the first time, the mathematical and philosophical tools to go out and find the answers for themselves. In the year 1929, amidst a sweeping effort to modernize the collections of Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, a group of historians made a discovery that would send shockwaves through the world of cartography. Tucked away in a forgotten stack of documents, they found a fragment of a world map drawn on gazelle skin parchment. It was signed by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis, and it was dated to the year 1513. At first glance, it was a beautiful artifact of the Islamic Golden Age, but a closer look revealed something utterly astonishing. This was not just a map of the Mediterranean, the well-trodden domain of the Ottoman Navy. This map showed the coast of Brazil with a precision that should have been impossible for its time. It depicted the Andes Mountains, a feature Europeans had only just begun to hear whispers about from the recent voyages of Amerigo Vespucci. It even included details like the fauna of the New World, with illustrations of monkeys and parrots, annotations describing the native peoples, and coastlines that seemed to extend southward into a territory that looked hauntingly familiar, yet completely out of place. The map's creator, Piri Reis, was a respected and experienced admiral, not a fringe theorist. And in the extensive notes he left in the margins of his work, he did something extraordinarily rare for any mapmaker in history. He provided a bibliography. He explained clearly that this map was a compilation, a synthesis of many earlier sources. He listed 20 different charts he had used, including several he described as being very old and very rare. Most tantalizingly, he claimed that some of these source maps dated all the way back to the time of Alexander the Great, to the 4th century BCE. This is a statement that, if true, rewrites the entire history of exploration. It suggests that the ancient world, the world of the Greeks and the Phoenicians and perhaps even earlier civilizations, possessed a knowledge of global geography that we have completely lost, a knowledge that somehow found its way into the hands of a 16th century Ottoman scholar. This claim of ancient sources is the very heart of the Piri Reis enigma. How could a map from 1513 show the Amazon River and the plateau of Brazil with such clarity? European maps of the same era were still fumbling with the basic shape of the Caribbean. The most compelling and controversial interpretation involves the southernmost part of the map. Some researchers, including a team that analyzed the map in the 1950s, argued that the oddly shaped landmass curling around the bottom could be interpreted as the northern coastline of Antarctica. But not Antarctica as we know it, buried under miles of ice. This interpretation suggests the map shows Queen Maud Land as it would appear if it were ice-free, a geography that has not been visible on this planet for millions of years. This theory, often tied to ideas about advanced prehistoric civilizations or even extraterrestrial influence, is fiercely disputed by mainstream scholars who point to serious cartographic and historical problems with the alignment. The more plausible, yet still deeply impressive, explanation is that Piri Reis was a master synthesizer. He had access to the vast archives of the Ottoman Empire, which had absorbed the knowledge of the Byzantines, the Arabs, and likely many others through its extensive trade networks. His sources probably included Portuguese Portolan charts, captured from ships or obtained through spies, which contained the very latest, highly guarded discoveries from their voyages. He might have also used maps derived from the voyages of Chinese Admiral Zheng He, whose fleets are theorized by some to have reached the Americas decades before Columbus. Piri Reis's genius was in his ability to take these disparate, fragmented sources, some modern, some ancient, some accurate, some distorted, and weave them together into a single, coherent image. He was acting as a human database, compiling the lost cartographic knowledge of the ages onto a single sheet of parchment. Ultimately, the true power of the Piri Reis map lies not in proving a specific theory about Antarctica or Alexander the Great, but in what it represents, a glaring, beautiful anomaly. It is a stark reminder that history is not a neat, complete puzzle. It is a collection of fragments, and we have undoubtedly lost more pieces than we have found. The map forces us to confront the uncomfortable possibility that entire epochs of exploration and discovery have been erased from the record, their achievements known only through cryptic references in the work of later compilers like Piri Reis. It stands as a permanent challenge to our arrogance, a whisper from the past that says our understanding of ancient capabilities is still incomplete. It encourages a humble and open-minded approach to history, one that is always ready to question established narratives when a piece of gazelle skin, covered in astonishingly accurate lines, suddenly emerges from the dust. Yet for all their errors and mysteries, these maps were not simply decorative artifacts gathering dust in royal libraries. They were active, dynamic tools that launched ships, inspired kings, and literally shaped the course of history. When we picture Christopher Columbus standing before the court of Spain, his ambitious plan was not born from pure fantasy, but was meticulously argued using the most advanced cartography of his day. He carried with him a map heavily influenced by the work of Claudius Ptolemy, a map that showed the entire breadth of Asia stretching far to the east. But he also carried another, more recent chart, likely based on the work of the Florentine scholar Paolo Toscanelli, which took Ptolemy's overestimation of Asia's size and combined it with an underestimation of the Earth's circumference. The result was a powerful, persuasive, and utterly flawed vision. A very narrow Atlantic Ocean separating Europe from the riches of Cathay and the Spice Islands. This map, this beautiful and dangerous fiction, was the primary evidence Columbus used to secure his funding. He wasn't navigating blindly into the unknown. He was sailing directly into a world that his maps had promised him was there. His voyage was a testament to the immense power of cartography to not just record reality, but to actively create it, to will entire continents into existence through the sheer force of a persuasive line drawn on parchment. This relationship between the mapmaker and the explorer became a powerful feedback loop that accelerated the pace of discovery at an astonishing rate. Each returning ship carried with it priceless new data, a captain's log, a rough sketch of a coastline, the bearing of a treacherous headland. Cartographers in Lisbon, Seville, and Antwerp hungrily absorbed these fragments of new knowledge, painstakingly incorporating them into the next generation of maps. A perfect example of this is the Cantino Planisphere of 1502, an early world map that is a living snapshot of this iterative process. It shows the recent Portuguese discoveries along the coast of Africa, and most importantly, the vague, bulging outline of a new landmass to the west, labeled Terra del Rei de Portugal, the land of the King of Portugal. This was Brazil, and its placement on the map was a direct result of Pedro Alves Cabral's accidental voyage 2 years earlier. The map isn't perfectly accurate, but it's a quantum leap forward from what existed just a decade before. It was this updated map and others like it that then guided the next wave of explorers like Amerigo Vespucci, who would go on to confirm that this was not a part of Asia, but an entirely new world. Knowledge led to discovery, which led to new knowledge, creating a virtuous cycle that rapidly shrank the blank spaces on the globe. The trust these explorers placed in their charts, even when they were provably wrong, reveals a profound truth about the human psyche in the face of the unknown. A map, any map, provides a framework for courage. It transforms a terrifying, formless void into a structured space that can be planned for, argued over, and conquered. For Ferdinand Magellan, embarking on his quest to find a western route to the Spice Islands, his confidence was built upon a patchwork of sources. He would have studied Ptolemaic maps for their theoretical framework, consulted detailed Portuguese Portolan charts for navigating familiar African coasts, and pored over the latest reports from Spanish voyages in the New World. He was looking for a pattern, a gap, a hint. His belief in the existence of a strait near the southern tip of South America wasn't a wild guess. It was a deduction based on the shape of the coastline as it was then understood. When he finally stumbled upon the tortuous, storm-racked passage that now bears his name, it was a moment of brutal validation. The map had suggested a possibility, and his sheer nerve and desperation had turned that possibility into a reality, forever linking his name to one of the most daring navigational feats in history. Beyond guiding individual voyages, these maps served as the ultimate sales pitches to the bankers and monarchs who funded them. They were not just technical documents, they were prospectuses for empire. A map dotted with images of spice plants, gold mines, and prosperous cities was far more effective at opening the royal purse strings than any verbal description could be. They made the promise of wealth tangible and, most importantly, claimable. The famous Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, where Spain and Portugal divided the entire unexplored world between them along a line of longitude, is perhaps the ultimate act of cartographic audacity. Two powers sitting in a room in Europe used a map to slice the globe in two, allocating unknown continents and oceans as if they were dividing a pie. This act, breathtaking in its arrogance, demonstrates how completely maps had come to define reality itself. They were no longer representations of the world, they were instruments for its creation, ownership, and control. The lines drawn in ink in European courts would dictate the fate of millions of people across oceans for centuries to come, proving that the pen and the cartographer's quill could indeed be mightier than the sword. The notion of a lost golden age, a sophisticated global civilization wiped clean by some cataclysm, is a powerful and seductive idea. It captures our imagination because it offers a neat, if terrifying, solution to these cartographic puzzles. Perhaps the theory goes an advanced seafaring culture, be it Atlantis, a precursor to ancient Egypt, or another unknown society, achieved a global understanding of the world tens of thousands of years ago. Their maps, passed down through fragments and copies, eventually found their way into the hands of medieval scholars like Piri Reis, who incorporated them without fully understanding their origin. This would explain the seemingly impossible knowledge of Antarctica's subglacial topography or the precise longitudinal placement of islands. Proponents of this view often point to shared architectural marvels or mythological flood stories across disparate cultures as further evidence of this common, forgotten ancestor. It's a compelling narrative, but one that faces a formidable obstacle: a complete lack of archaeological evidence. If such a globe-spanning, technologically advanced civilization existed, where are its cities, its tools, its garbage heaps? The silence of the archaeological record is deafening. A more extraterrestrial twist on this theory suggests that this knowledge didn't come from a lost human civilization, but was instead given to us. The ancient astronaut hypothesis proposes that visitors from other worlds provided early humans with advanced geographical data, or perhaps even created the maps themselves. This is often used to explain not only the Piri Reis map, but also the breathtaking precision in the alignment of ancient monuments with celestial bodies. How could the builders of the Great Pyramid align it so perfectly to true north without some form of advanced technology? The argument is that such feats are so far beyond the presumed capabilities of ancient peoples that an external, non-human intelligence must be involved. This perspective, however, fundamentally underestimates the sheer brilliance, patience, and observational prowess of our ancestors. It replaces the awe of human achievement with a speculative dependency on outside intervention, robbing ancient cultures of the credit they so richly deserve for their meticulous, hard-won knowledge. Mainstream scholarship, of course, offers far more grounded, though no less fascinating, explanations. The most likely scenario for the Piri Reis map's accuracy is that it is a masterful work of synthesis. Admiral Reis himself listed his sources, which included ancient Greek maps, contemporary Portuguese charts, and even a map drawn by Columbus. The Ottoman Empire at its height was an information superpower. Its control of trade routes and its vast network of spies and diplomats meant it had access to the most cutting-edge and most secret geographical knowledge from around the world. A Portuguese chart captured from a ship, an Arab merchant's report from a voyage down the African coast, a copied page from a Spanish explorer's logbook, all of these fragments would have flowed into Istanbul. A cartographer of Reis's skill could have fused these dozens of sources, reconciling their differences and errors, to create a composite map that was more complete and accurate than any single source. What we see as an impossible depiction of Antarctica might simply be a distorted rendering of the southern tip of South America, blended with mythical southern continents that had been a part of cartographic legend since Ptolemy, and perhaps informed by early sightings of the actual, ice-covered landmass by unknown whalers or explorers whose reports never made it into the official record. The same principle applies to the celestial alignments of ancient monuments. The idea that our ancestors needed extraterrestrial help to track the stars misunderstands their deep, generational connection to the night sky. They weren't distracted by city lights or the glow of screens. The heavens were their clock, their calendar, and their storybook, a priestly class dedicating centuries to observing the slow dance of the constellations could easily identify the cyclical patterns of solstices and equinoxes. By driving a simple stake into the ground and tracking the length and direction of its shadow over years, they could determine true north with astonishing precision. The construction of Stonehenge or the Great Pyramid was not a sudden, miraculous event, but the culmination of a long tradition of precise astronomical observation, painstakingly translated into stone. It was a monumental effort, but one achieved with simple tools, profound intellect, and an immense investment of time and communal will. Ultimately, the enduring power of these controversial theories isn't really about the maps themselves. It's about us. They reflect a deep-seated desire for mystery, a longing for a past that is more dramatic and more wondrous than the one presented by the slow, methodical grind of archaeological evidence. There's a certain romance in the idea of lost worlds and ancient secrets that can be more appealing than the complex, nuanced reality of cultural exchange, scholarly synthesis, and human ingenuity. But in trying to assign these achievements to aliens or Atlanteans, we miss the true wonder. The real mystery is how human beings, with nothing but their eyes, their minds, and their unwavering curiosity, managed to measure the world. The truth that a man in a library in Alexandria could calculate the size of the Earth with a stick and a shadow, or that a network of sailors and scholars could piece together the contours of continents through shared knowledge is arguably more miraculous than any fiction. These controversies, therefore, serve a vital purpose. They force us to look closer, to question the standard narratives, and in doing so, they lead us to a much deeper appreciation for the breathtaking capabilities of the ancient mind. In our world of instant GPS and satellite imagery that updates by the second, it's tempting to see the methods of those ancient mapmakers as charming relics, interesting steps on the way to our current technological perfection. But to dismiss them would be to miss the point entirely. Their true legacy isn't just in the maps they left behind. It's in the powerful, timeless lessons they offer about how to navigate any complex challenge, whether it's a trackless ocean or the uncertainties of our own lives and careers. They teach us the profound value of patience and direct observation. Eratosthenes didn't calculate the Earth's circumference by quickly searching for an answer online. He did it by patiently watching a shadow, questioning a discrepancy, and thoughtfully applying geometry to a real-world phenomenon. He understood the fundamental principles behind the measurement. Today, we often fall into the trap of using technology as a black box. We trust the result on our screen without understanding how it was derived. The ancient mapmakers remind us that true mastery comes not from blindly following a device, but from comprehending the core principles that make it work. If our satellites were to fail, would we remember how to find true north by the stars? Could we estimate distance by pacing it out? Their wisdom urges us to not let our foundational skills atrophy, to maintain a hands-on understanding of the world that exists beyond the screen. Furthermore, their work was never just a single discipline. It was a breathtaking fusion of science, art, culture, and storytelling. A Babylonian map wove together cosmology and geography. A medieval mappa mundi blended theology with bestiary lore. A Polynesian navigator's mental chart combined astronomy, oceanography, meteorology, and generations of oral poetry. They didn't silo their knowledge. This interdisciplinary approach is a vital lesson for our era of increasing specialization. The most intractable problems we face today, climate change, public health crises, social inequality, cannot be solved by a single field working in isolation. They require the same kind of synthesis the ancient mapmakers perfected, where hard data is enriched by cultural context, where scientific models are communicated through compelling narratives, and where artistic visualization makes complex information understandable and impactful. They teach us that the most accurate map is not always the most useful one, and that sometimes to truly represent reality, you need to speak to the human spirit as well as to the rational mind. Perhaps one of their most humbling lessons is in how they handled being wrong. Their maps were filled with errors, phantom continents, shrunken oceans, mythical kingdoms, and these mistakes often persisted for centuries. Yet, these very errors were what drove exploration forward. Ptolemy's miscalculation of the Earth's size directly inspired Columbus's voyage, which, while based on a fundamental error, accidentally connected two worlds. Their process shows us that error is not a dead end. It is a necessary part of discovery. It teaches the importance of intellectual humility, the understanding that our current knowledge is always incomplete and potentially flawed. In an age of algorithmically reinforced beliefs and echo chambers, this is more crucial than ever. The ancient mapmakers demonstrate that progress is not a straight line from ignorance to truth, but a messy, iterative process of conjecture, refutation, and revision. We must be willing to continuously verify our assumptions, to seek out new information that challenges our existing maps of the world, and to have the courage to redraw them when the evidence demands it. Their history is a powerful antidote to the overconfidence that can come from an over-reliance on technology. Finally, they exemplify the incredible power of cross-cultural collaboration. The greatest leaps in cartography rarely happened in isolation. The Greeks built on Babylonian astronomy. Islamic scholars in the House of Wisdom preserved, translated, and critically improved upon Greek and Roman texts, then added their own discoveries from trade routes that stretched across the known world. This knowledge eventually filtered back into a reawakening Europe, fueling the Renaissance and the Age of Discovery. No single culture had a monopoly on genius. Innovation flourished at the bustling intersections of different worldviews, where ideas could be exchanged, debated, and synthesized. This lesson is an urgent one for our globally connected yet often fragmented world. Whether in science, business, or art, breakthroughs happen when we break down barriers and embrace the fact that valuable knowledge and perspective can come from anywhere. The ancient mapmakers didn't see knowledge as something to be hoarded, but as a shared resource to be built upon collectively. Their legacy urges us to look beyond our immediate borders, to be curious about other ways of knowing, and to recognize that the most complete map of our complex world can only be drawn together. The enduring legacy of these ancient mapmakers is far more than a collection of old charts gathering dust in museums. It is a living testament to a fundamental human drive, the relentless, beautiful pursuit of knowledge against impossible odds. They looked up at a sky without satellites and saw a celestial clock. They stood on shores facing trackless oceans and envisioned the lands beyond. With nothing but their wits, simple tools, and an insatiable curiosity, they achieved what we, with all our technology, can still scarcely believe. They didn't just draw lines on clay or parchment. They drew the first blueprints of human understanding, proving that the mind's capacity for observation and reason is the most powerful instrument we will ever possess. Their work fundamentally shaped the course of history, dictating the routes of explorers, the ambitions of empires, and the very way cultures interacted with and understood one another. The maps of Ptolemy guided European minds for a millennium. The precise Portolan charts gave sailors the confidence to venture beyond the sight of land. The sophisticated grid systems of the Chinese and the star paths of the Polynesians organized vast territories and connected distant islands. These weren't passive records, they were active agents of change. They made the unknown knowable and the impossible possible. They laid the absolute groundwork for every geographic information system, every satellite navigation fix, and every digital map we effortlessly swipe today. The latitude and longitude we take for granted on our phones is a direct gift from Hipparchus. The very concept of projecting a spherical world onto a flat surface is a problem Ptolemy first wrestled with. We are still walking the paths they carved, yet their greatest lesson might not be in their accuracy, but in their inspiring humanity. They remind us that true discovery is a messy, iterative, and profoundly human endeavor. Their maps were filled with errors, from phantom continents to misplaced oceans, but those mistakes were not failures. They were invitations. They were the blank spaces on the map that whispered, "What if?" And what's next, driving generations to sail further, look closer, and dream bigger. They teach us the value of intellectual humility, the understanding that our current knowledge is always incomplete, and that the courage to be wrong is the first step toward being right. In an age where algorithms so often tell us where to go and what to think, the ancient mapmakers urge us to never outsource our own wonder, to never stop being the cartographers of our own curiosity. So the next time you glance at your phone to find your way, take a fleeting moment to consider the breathtaking journey that single gesture represents. It carries the weight of Eratosthenes measuring the planet with a stick and a shadow. It holds the memory of countless unnamed sailors memorizing the swell of the waves and the turn of the stars. It is built upon the patience of monks illuminating sacred worlds and the boldness of scholars who dared to redraw the boundaries of the possible. They charted the unknown with nothing but wonder, and in doing so, they mapped the very best of what we are capable of. Their legacy is an eternal invitation to keep exploring, to keep questioning, and to never, ever stop marveling at the world and the worlds within us waiting to